The iron shackle bit into her flesh like the teeth of some mechanical beast, and when Zachary Vance first saw the woman chained to that post behind the Carson City, Nevada saloon, he knew the world had shown him another of its casual cruelties that only a hard man could answer. It was August 1876, and the desert heat made the air shimmer like water over stone. Zachary had come down from the Sierra Nevada mountains after 3 months trapping in the high country, his pack mules laden with pelts that would fetch good prices in the mining town. He stood 6 feet 4 inches tall, his body hardened by years of solitary survival in the wilderness, muscles layered thick across his shoulders and arms from splitting wood, hauling game, and wrestling with nature itself. His dark hair fell past his collar, tied back with a leather cord, and his beard was thick but trimmed close enough to keep civilized. He wore buckskin pants and a cotton shirt that strained against his broad chest, and his hands were calloused and strong enough to break a man's jaw with one blow. He had been walking past the back of the Lucky Dollar saloon when he heard the quiet sobbing. Most men would have kept walking. Carson City was full of troubles that were not their own, and the smart ones knew to mind their business. But Zachary had learned in the mountains that ignoring suffering only let it spread like gangrene, and he had never been good at looking away. The woman sat with her back against the weathered post, her dark hair hanging in tangles around her face. Her dress had once been blue but was now stained with dust and worse things. The chain attached to the iron cuff around her left ankle was barely 3 feet long, bolted to the post with a heavy padlock. She could not have been more than 22 or 23 years old, and when she looked up at his approach, her eyes were the color of storm clouds, gray and fierce despite the tears. "Please," she whispered, "please just bring me water." Zachary knelt down beside her, and she flinched back instinctively. He moved slowly, the way he would approach a wounded animal, letting her see his hands were empty. "Who did this?" His voice was rough from disuse, the voice of a man who spent more time talking to mountains than people. "Does it matter?" Her words carried the sharp edge of hopelessness. "They own this place. They own half the town. Nobody will help me." "I am not nobody." Zachary examined the lock. It was old, rusted from the desert air, but still solid enough. "What is your name?" "Violet. Violet Brennan." She watched him with those storm-gray eyes, and he could see the intelligence in them, the fighting spirit that had not yet been beaten down completely. "You should leave before they come back. They will kill you for even talking to me." "Let them try." Zachary stood and looked around the alley. The sun was starting to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and red. The sounds of the saloon drifted out through the walls, piano music and laughter and the clink of glasses. He could hear men's voices, rough and careless, and his jaw tightened. "How long have you been here?" 3 days, her voice broke. "They bring me scraps once a day. Let me use a bucket. They say I ran up a debt at their boarding house that I have to work it off inside, but I know what kind of work they mean, and I would rather die chained to this post." Zachary had seen enough of the world's darkness to believe her. Men who would chain a woman like a dog were capable of any cruelty. He reached into his belt and pulled out a hunting knife with a blade as long as his hand. The steel caught the dying light. Violet's eyes widened. "What are you doing?" "Getting you free." He knelt again and wedged the knife point into the lock mechanism. The metal resisted, and he applied more pressure, the muscles in his forearms standing out like cords of wood. The lock groaned in protest. "They will hunt us both," Violet said, but there was hope creeping into her voice now, fragile as new ice on a mountain stream. "I have been hunted before." The lock gave way with a sharp crack that sounded too loud in the confined space of the alley. Zachary pulled the shackle open and eased it off her ankle. The skin underneath was raw and bleeding, rubbed to meat by the iron. His expression darkened. "Can you walk?" Violet tried to stand, but her legs buckled. 3 days without proper food or water, sitting in one position, had stolen her strength. Zachary caught her before she fell, one arm around her waist, and he felt how light she was, how fragile. It stirred something protective in his chest, something primal that had nothing to do with civilization. "I will carry you," he said, "your furs, your supplies. I can come back for them." He lifted her easily, cradling her against his chest as though she weighed nothing at all. Her head fell against his shoulder, and he could feel her trembling. "Hold on to me." The back door of the saloon slammed open just as Zachary turned to leave. Two men stumbled out, their faces flushed with whiskey and meanness. One was tall and thin, with a scar across his cheek. The other was shorter, broader, with small eyes set too close together. "Hey!" the scarred one shouted. "What the hell do you think you are doing with our property?" Zachary did not break stride. He kept walking toward the end of the alley, Violet's weight solid and real in his arms. The shorter man moved to block their path, his hand dropping to the pistol at his hip. "I asked you a question, mountain trash." "Move." Zachary's voice was flat, emotionless, but there was something in it that made even drunk men hesitate. He was bigger than both of them combined, and he carried himself with the absolute confidence of someone who had faced down grizzly bears and mountain lions and survived. "The hell I will." The man's hand closed on his pistol grip. "That girl owes us money. She belongs to us until she works off her debt." "No person belongs to anyone." Zachary shifted Violet's weight slightly, freeing his right arm. "You have 3 seconds to step aside." The scarred man laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "You going to make us, mountain man? There are 2 of us and 1 of you, and you are holding a girl. I do not like your odds." Zachary did not wait for 3 seconds. His fist shot out with the speed and force of a striking snake, catching the shorter man square in the face. The crunch of breaking bone echoed off the alley walls, and the man dropped like a puppet with cut strings, blood pouring from his ruined nose. The pistol clattered unfired to the dirt. The scarred man fumbled for his own weapon, but Zachary was already moving. He turned his shoulder and slammed into the man with all the momentum of his massive body, driving him back into the saloon wall hard enough to knock the wind from his lungs. The man slid down the wall, gasping like a landed fish. "Stay down," Zachary said quietly. Then he was moving again, striding out of the alley with Violet pressed against his chest. Behind them, he could hear the scarred man wheezing, trying to catch enough breath to shout. They had perhaps 5 minutes before the whole saloon knew what had happened. Zachary's camp was a mile outside town, hidden in a grove of cottonwood trees near the Carson River. His 2 pack mules were hobbled there, along with his supplies and the season's worth of furs. He moved through the darkening streets of Carson City with long, ground-eating strides, avoiding the main roads where possible. Violet had stopped trembling and now simply rested against him, her arms looped around his neck. "Thank you," she whispered. "I thought I was going to die there." "You are safe now." Zachary did not know if that was true, but he said it anyway, because she needed to hear it. The desert night was falling fast, and with it came the blessed cool air that made the August heat bearable. Stars began to appear overhead, more stars than anyone could count, spread across the black canvas of the sky. They reached his camp without incident. Zachary set Violet down gently on his bedroll, which was spread on a canvas tarp beneath the cottonwoods. The river murmured nearby, and the mules snorted softly at their approach, recognizing their owner's scent. "I need to clean that ankle," Zachary said, moving to his supplies. He pulled out a tin of salve he made himself from pine resin and herbs, along with strips of clean cloth for bandaging. When he returned to Violet's side, she was watching him with an expression he could not quite read. "Why did you help me?" she asked. "You do not even know me." Zachary knelt beside her and took her injured ankle in his hands, his touch surprisingly gentle for such large, rough fingers. "I do not need to know you to know what is right." He dabbed at the raw skin with water from his canteen, washing away the dried blood and dirt. Violet hissed in pain but did not pull away. "What brought you to Carson City?" "Bad choices and worse luck." She watched as he applied the salve, his movements careful and precise. "I came west from Missouri after my parents died of cholera. I thought I could make a fresh start, maybe find work as a seamstress or a teacher. But the boarding house owner, Mrs. Kellins, she said I needed to pay a month in advance. I did not have enough money, so she said I could pay with work. Then the price kept going up. She added charges for food, for laundry, for things I never even used. When I tried to leave, her sons stopped me. They said I owed $300 and they were keeping me until I paid it off one way or another." "The 2 in the alley?" "Yes, Daniel and Robert Kellins. Their mother runs the Lucky Dollar and half a dozen other businesses in town. She's not someone you cross lightly." Violet watched as Zachary wrapped her ankle in clean bandages, his touch professional and impersonal. "You just made some very dangerous enemies." I have had dangerous enemies before. Zachary tied off the bandage and sat back on his heels. Are you hungry? Starving. He built a small fire, using dry cottonwood branches that would burn with minimal smoke, then retrieved jerky and hardtack from his supplies. It was simple food, trail food, but Violet ate it like it was a feast from the finest restaurant in San Francisco. She drank deeply from his canteen, and color began to return to her cheeks. What is your name? She asked between bites. Zachary Vance. Most people call me Zach. Where are you from, Zach? Here and there. I spent the last 10 years in the mountains, trapping and hunting. Before that, I was in the war. He did not specify which side, and she did not ask. The war had been over for 11 years, but its wounds still ran deep. I come down to Carson City a few times a year to trade my furs and stock up on supplies. And then you go back to the mountains? Yes. That sounds lonely. Zachary poked at the fire with a stick, sending sparks drifting up into the night. Sometimes lonely is better than the alternative. They sat in silence for a while, listening to the river and the night sounds of the desert. Coyotes yipped in the distance and an owl hooted from somewhere in the cottonwoods. The moon rose, nearly full, painting everything in silver light. We need to leave before morning, Zachary said finally. The Kellins will come looking. They cannot afford to let this go unanswered, or they lose face in the town. Lose face and they lose power. Where will we go? North, into the mountains. I have a cabin about 3 days' ride from here, up in the high country. It is not much, but it is defensible and well hidden. We can hole up there until things cool down. Violet hugged her knees to her chest. I do not want to bring you more trouble. The trouble is already here. Zachary looked at her across the fire, and their eyes met. In the flickering light, she looked younger and more vulnerable, but he could still see that core of steel inside her. She was a survivor, just like him. Besides, I could not leave you to them. I may live like an animal sometimes, but I try not to act like one. You are nothing like an animal. Violet's voice was soft. You are the kindest man I have met since coming to Nevada. Zachary did not know what to say to that, so he said nothing. Kindness was not a word people usually associated with him. Dangerous, solitary, hard, those were the words that followed his name. But when Violet smiled at him, small and tentative in the moonlight, something in his chest twisted painfully. They broke camp an hour before dawn. Zachary loaded his furs and supplies onto the pack mules with practiced efficiency, working in the dark by feel and memory. Violet helped as best she could, though her injured ankle made her movements slow and careful. He had one riding horse, a sturdy mare named Sage, and he lifted Violet onto the saddle before swinging up behind her. Her back pressed against his chest, and he wrapped one arm around her waist to keep her steady. Hold on, he said, and nudged Sage into a walk. They followed the Carson River north as the sun rose behind them, painting the desert in shades of gold and amber. The Sierra Nevada mountains loomed ahead, their peaks still snow-capped even in August. Zachary kept them moving at a steady pace, not so fast that they would exhaust the animals, but fast enough to put distance between themselves and Carson City. Violet was quiet for the first hour, but as the sun climbed higher and the temperature rose, she began to ask questions. She wanted to know about the mountains, about trapping and hunting and surviving alone. Zachary found himself answering, his voice losing some of its rough edge as he talked about the things he knew best. He told her about tracking deer through snow, about the way the aspens turned gold in autumn, about the crystal-clear lakes that dotted the high country like scattered jewels. It sounds beautiful, Violet said, but also hard. It is both. Zachary guided Sage around a cluster of sagebrush, but it is honest. The mountain does not lie to you or cheat you. If you are strong and smart and lucky, you survive. If not, you die. There is a purity in that. Is that why you live up there? To escape the dishonesty of people? Zachary was quiet for a long moment. Partly. I also escaped because I saw enough killing in the war to last 10 lifetimes. After it ended, I could not stand being around people anymore. Every loud noise made me want to shoot something. Every crowded room felt like a trap. The mountains gave me space to breathe, to remember who I was before the war tried to turn me into a killer. Violet's hand came to rest on top of his where it circled her waist. I'm sorry you went through that. It was a long time ago. But her touch was warm and real, and it made something inside him that had been frozen for years begin to thaw. They stopped at midday to rest the animals and eat. Zachary rationed their water carefully. They would not reach the next reliable source until evening. Violet sat in the shade of a boulder while he checked the mules' hooves and adjusted their loads. When he returned to her side, she was looking back the way they had come. "Do you think they are following us?" she asked. "Yes." Zachary saw no point in lying. "But we have a good head start, and they do not know where we are going. Once we get into the mountains proper, it will be almost impossible for them to track us if we are careful." "You are very confident." "I am very experienced." He offered her his canteen. "How is your ankle?" "Better. Your salve is working." She drank and handed the canteen back. "Where did you learn medicine?" "From a Washoe woman who lived near my cabin. She taught me about the plants and herbs that grow in the mountains, which ones heal and which ones kill. In exchange, I would hunt for her and her family, bring them meat when game was scarce." "Do they still live there?" "No. They moved north years ago following the old ways, but I remember what she taught me." Zachary stood and offered Violet his hand. "We should keep moving. I want to make the pass before nightfall." The afternoon was brutal. The sun beat down with relentless intensity, and the air shimmered with heat. Violet leaned back against Zachary's chest, seeking what shade his body could provide, and he gave it willingly. His arm around her waist tightened protectively whenever the trail became rough, holding her secure in the saddle. She felt small and soft against his hard-muscled frame, and he found himself hyper-aware of every place their bodies touched. It had been a long time since Zachary had held a woman. Years. Perhaps not since before the war. The life he had chosen did not leave much room for companionship of any kind, let alone the romantic sort. But Violet was awakening something in him, some long dormant need for connection that went beyond mere physical desire. He wanted to protect her, yes, but he also wanted to know her, to understand what made her laugh, what made her afraid, what dreams she harbored in her storm-gray eyes. They reached the pass as the sun was setting. The trail narrowed here, winding between towering walls of granite that still held the day's heat. Zachary guided Sage carefully, his eyes scanning for loose rock or hidden dangers. Once through the pass, the landscape opened into high meadows dotted with pine and fir trees. A stream ran clear and cold down the center of the meadow, fed by snowmelt from the peaks above. "We will camp here tonight," Zachary said, dismounting and then lifting Violet down. His hands spanned her waist easily, and he set her on her feet with the same care he might give a delicate piece of china. "It is beautiful," Violet breathed, looking around at the meadow. Wildflowers grew in profusion: lupine and Indian paintbrush and columbine, their colors vivid against the green grass. The air was cooler here, thin and clean, scented with pine resin and mountain herbs. "Wait until morning. It's even better in daylight." Zachary began unpacking the mules, setting up a more permanent camp than the hasty one they had made the night before. He erected a small canvas lean-to for shelter, arranged flat stones for a fire pit, and spread his bedroll inside the lean-to. "You take the shelter. I will sleep under the stars." "That's not fair to you." "I am used to it." Zachary collected deadfall for the fire, his movements efficient and purposeful. "Besides, you need a good night's sleep. Tomorrow will be even harder. We have another full day of climbing before we reach my cabin." Violet watched him work, noting the way his muscles bunched and flexed beneath his shirt, the casual competence of every action. She had never met a man quite like Zachary Vance. He was rough and hard on the outside, but she was beginning to see glimpses of something gentler underneath. The way he had tended her wounds, the careful way he had lifted her onto the horse, the protective circle of his arm around her waist all day, keeping her safe. "Zach," she said softly, "thank you for everything." He looked up from the fire he was building, his eyes catching the last rays of the setting sun. "You already thanked me." "I know, but I do not think I can say it enough." She limped over to where he knelt, her injured ankle protesting the movement. "You risked your life for a stranger. You gave up your comfortable camp and your plans to help me. That's not something people do anymore, if they ever did." Zachary stood, and she had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. He was so tall, so solid, like a mountain himself. Any decent person would have done the same? No. Violet shook her head. They would not. I sat chained to that post for 3 days, and dozens of people walked past me. Some looked away, some pretended not to see, some saw and did not care. You were the only one who stopped, the only one who cared enough to do something. Something in Zachary's expression softened. I am glad I was the one who found you. The words hung in the air between them, charged with meanings neither of them was ready to speak aloud. Violet felt heat rise to her cheeks that had nothing to do with the day's sun. She stepped back, breaking the moment. I should help with dinner, she said. Sit. Rest your ankle. Zachary turned back to the fire. I've been cooking for myself for 10 years. I can manage one more meal. Violet sat on a convenient log and watched as Zachary prepared their meal. He had fresh trout from the stream he had caught them with his hands in the time it took to water the animals, a feat that seemed impossible until she saw the results. He wrapped them in wet leaves and buried them in the coals of the fire, along with wild onions he had dug from the meadow. The smell was incredible, and Violet's stomach growled loudly enough to make them both laugh. How long since you had a real meal? Zachary asked. Too long. Mrs. Kellin fed me scraps at the boarding house, always claiming the cost of the food was adding to my debt. And of course, once they chained me up, I got almost nothing. Zachary's jaw tightened. When I sell my furs, I'm sending a telegram to the territorial marshal. What the Kellins did to you is illegal, no matter how they try to dress it up. Will anyone care? They are rich and influential. I am nobody. You are not nobody. Zachary's voice was fierce. You are Violet Brennan, and you survived something that would have broken most people. That makes you somebody in my book. Violet felt tears prick her eyes, but she blinked them away. She had cried enough over the past 3 days. Now was the time to be strong. What about you? Do you have family somewhere? Not anymore. My parents died when I was young. I had a brother, but he was killed at Shiloh. Zachary poked at the fire, sending sparks swirling upward. After that, I did not see much point in putting down roots. Seemed like everyone I cared about ended up dead. That is a lonely way to live. Maybe, but it is safe. Can't lose people if you do not let anyone get close. He looked at her, and there was something vulnerable in his eyes, something that suggested he was reconsidering that philosophy. The fish should be ready. The meal was simple but delicious. They ate with their fingers, burning their mouths on the hot, flaky flesh of the trout, and Violet could not remember food ever tasting so good. After they finished, Zachary made coffee in a battered tin pot, strong and bitter and perfect for the cooling mountain evening. They sat by the fire as darkness fell completely, neither one speaking, simply existing in comfortable silence. The stars came out in their thousands, so bright and close it felt like you could reach up and pluck them from the sky. A meteor streaked across the heavens, brief and brilliant. Make a wish, Violet said softly. Do you believe in that? I want to. After everything that has happened, I want to believe in something. Zachary looked at her across the fire. Her face was turned upward toward the stars, and the firelight painted her in shades of gold and shadow. She was beautiful, he realized, not in the polished artificial way of saloon girls or the society women in their fancy dresses, but in a natural, unaffected way that took his breath. Beautiful and brave and real. Then make a wish, he said quietly. Violet closed her eyes. Her lips moved soundlessly, and Zachary found himself wondering what she wished for. Safety, probably. A fresh start. A life free from fear and debt, and men who would chain her like an animal. When she opened her eyes, she caught him watching her. What did you wish for? I did not wish. I'm not a wishing kind of man. Maybe you should try it sometime. She smiled, and it transformed her entire face, chasing away the shadows and revealing the young woman she really was beneath the trauma. You might be surprised. That night, Zachary lay on his back beside the fire, his blanket pulled up to his chin against the mountain cold, and he did something he had not done in years. He made a wish. He wished that he could keep Violet safe, that he could give her the life she deserved, free from fear and hardship. It was a foolish wish, probably impossible, but as he drifted off to sleep with the sound of the stream burbling nearby and Violet's quiet breathing coming from the lean-to, He found himself hoping it might come true anyway. He woke before dawn to the sound of horses. Many horses coming up the trail they had taken the day before. Zachary was on his feet instantly, his rifle in his hands, his heart pounding. He moved silently to the edge of the meadow and looked down the trail. In the gray pre-dawn light, he could make out shapes. Men on horseback, at least 6 of them, maybe more. They were still a mile away, picking their way carefully up the narrow pass. The Kellins had brought reinforcements. This was no longer a simple pursuit. This was a hunting party. Zachary ran back to camp and shook Violet awake. She came alert immediately, her eyes wide with fear. "They are coming," Zachary said tersely. "Get ready to move. We have maybe 20 minutes." They broke camp in frantic silence. Zachary loaded the mules with ruthless efficiency, abandoning anything that was not essential. The furs stayed. They were too bulky and too valuable to the Kellins. If the hunting party found them, it might buy some time while they argued over the spoils. He kept only the supplies they needed to survive, the ammunition for his rifle, and his traps. Violet helped as much as her injured ankle allowed, her face pale but determined. When everything was ready, Zachary lifted her onto Sage and swung up behind her. "There is another trail," he said, his voice low and urgent. "It is steeper and more dangerous, but it leads into high country where horses cannot follow easily. We will have to go on foot for part of it." "I can do it." Violet's voice was steady, though he could feel her shaking. They left the meadow heading north, away from the main trail. The sun was just beginning to tint the eastern sky pink when they heard shouts behind them. The hunting party had reached the meadow and found the abandoned camp. Zachary urged Sage into a trot, the mules scrambling behind on their lead ropes. The trail climbed steeply, switchbacking up the side of a mountain through dense forest. Pine branches whipped at them as they passed, and the air grew progressively thinner and colder. Violet clung to the saddle horn, and Zachary kept one arm locked around her waist, holding her secure as Sage lunged up the incline. Behind them, the sounds of pursuit grew closer. The Kellins were pushing their horses hard, gambling that they could catch their quarry before the terrain became impassable. Zachary knew these mountains better than anyone, but he also knew they were running out of time and options. They reached a point where the trail simply ended, giving way to a steep slope of loose scree and bare rock. Zachary dismounted and lifted Violet down. "From here, we go on foot," he said. He pulled his rifle from its scabbard and slung it across his back, then began transferring essential supplies from the mules into a single pack. Food, ammunition, blankets, fire-starting materials, everything else would have to stay. "What about Sage and the mules?" Violet asked. "I am setting them loose. They will find their way back down the mountain." It hurt to abandon the animals. Sage had been with him for 5 years, but he had no choice. He slapped the mare on the rump and watched her trot off into the trees, the mules following. With luck, the hunting party would waste time catching them. Zachary shouldered his pack and took Violet's hand. "Stay close to me. Step where I step. If you fall here, you will slide 100 feet before you can stop." They climbed. The scree shifted treacherously beneath their feet, threatening to cascade down the mountainside with every step. Violet's injured ankle made her movements awkward, but she gritted her teeth and kept going, her hand gripping Zachary's so tightly he could feel her bones through her skin. Below them, the hunting party reached the spot where they had left the horses. Zachary could hear angry voices, then a gunshot. Someone was shooting at them. The bullet whined off a rock 20 feet below, ricocheting harmlessly into the valley. "Keep moving," Zachary said. "They are just trying to scare us." They climbed for an hour, pulling themselves up by handholds, wedging their feet into cracks in the rock. The sun rose higher, and the temperature dropped as they gained altitude. Violet's breath came in ragged gasps, and her hands were bleeding from the rough stone. But she did not complain. She simply kept climbing, trusting Zachary to lead her to safety. Finally, they reached the top of the slope and collapsed on a flat expanse of granite. Behind and below them, the hunting party had given up the pursuit. Zachary could see them gathered at the base of the scree slope, their horses lathered and blowing. One man raised a rifle and fired, but they were well out of range now. The bullet did not even come close. "We made it," Violet gasped. "We actually made it." "For now." Zachary's chest was heaving, his muscles burning from the climb. "But we are a long way from safe. We lost our horses, most of our supplies, everything, and we are still a full day from my cabin on foot. What do we do?" Zachary looked at the sun, calculating. We rest for a few minutes, then we keep moving. There's a lake about 6 hours north of here, at the base of Mount Patterson. We can make it there by dark if we push hard. There is a cave where we can shelter, fish in the lake. We will be all right." Violet nodded, too exhausted to speak. She lay back on the warm granite and closed her eyes, her chest rising and falling rapidly. Zachary allowed himself 5 minutes to rest, then stood and offered her his hand. "Come on, we need to go." The journey to the lake was a nightmare of endurance. They followed game trails through dense forest, climbed over fallen logs, waded through icy streams. Zachary set a brutal pace, knowing that every minute they delayed gave the Kellins time to circle around and cut them off. Violet kept up through sheer force of will, though he could see the pain in her eyes, the way she favored her injured ankle. When she stumbled for the third time in an hour, Zachary simply picked her up and carried her. She protested weakly, but he ignored her. She weighed nothing compared to the deer and elk he had packed out of these mountains over the years. He adjusted her weight across his shoulders and kept walking, his powerful legs eating up the miles with steady, tireless strides. They reached the lake as the sun was setting. It was a pristine alpine jewel, surrounded by sheer granite cliffs and fed by a waterfall that tumbled down from the snowfields above. The water was so clear you could see trout swimming 20 feet down, and the air was clean and sharp with the scent of snow and stone. Zachary carried Violet to the cave he had mentioned, a shallow overhang in the cliff face that would provide shelter from wind and rain. He set her down gently inside, then went to gather wood for a fire. His body screamed with exhaustion, but he ignored it. They needed warmth, food, and rest in that order. By the time he had a fire going and had caught 2 trout from the lake, Violet had regained some of her strength. She helped him prepare the fish, and they ate in silence, too tired for conversation. After the meal, Zachary spread his blanket inside the cave and gestured for Violet to lie down. "Sleep," he said. "I will keep watch. You need sleep too. I will sleep later." He sat at the mouth of the cave, his rifle across his knees, his eyes on the darkening forest. "Right now, I need to make sure nobody followed us." Violet wanted to argue, but exhaustion won. She curled up on the blanket, and within minutes, she was asleep. Zachary sat watching over her, his face grim in the firelight. They had escaped for now, but the Kellins would not give up easily. Men like that did not accept defeat. They would keep hunting until they found Violet, or until something stopped them permanently. Zachary made a decision as he sat there in the cold mountain night. He could not spend the rest of his life running, looking over his shoulder, wondering when the Kellins would catch up. And he could not let Violet live that way either. She deserved better. She deserved to be free, truly free, to build a life without fear, which meant the Kellins had to be dealt with, permanently. The question was how. Zachary was good in the wilderness, one of the best, but he was not a killer. Not anymore. The war had been full of killing, and he had promised himself after Appomattox that he was done with violence. But some promises could not be kept, not when innocent lives were at stake. He sat through the night, turning the problem over in his mind, weighing options and discarding them. When dawn broke over the mountains, painting the lake in shades of pink and gold, he had a plan. It was dangerous, maybe foolish, but it was the only way he could see to end this without more running. Violet woke to the smell of coffee. She sat up, disoriented for a moment, then remembered where she was. Zachary was crouched by the fire, his eyes red-rimmed with exhaustion, but alert. "Did you sleep at all?" she asked. Some. It was a lie, but she did not need to know that. "How's your ankle?" "Sore, but better than yesterday." She accepted the tin cup of coffee he offered and wrapped her hands around it, savoring the warmth. "What do we do now?" "My cabin is about 8 hours northeast of here. We could reach it by mid-afternoon if we start soon." Zachary poured himself coffee and sat down across from her. "But I have been thinking. Even if we get to the cabin, we are not safe. The Kellins will keep looking. They will spread word, offer rewards. Someone will eventually tell them where I live, and then we will be right back where we started. So what do you suggest?" "I need to go back to Carson City." He saw her eyes widen in alarm and held up a hand. "Not to turn you in. To finish this. The Kellins run their business on fear and intimidation. If someone stands up to them, shows they are not invincible, their power will break. Others who they have hurt will come forward. The law will have to act. They will kill you. Violet's voice was tight with fear. Zach, you saw how many men they brought. 6 at least, maybe more. You cannot fight them all. I do not plan to fight them. I plan to outsmart them. He drank his coffee, his eyes distant. But I need to know you are safe first. I will take you to my cabin. There's enough food and supplies to last you months if needed. You will be safe there while I go back. No, Violet set her cup down with a sharp click. I will not let you risk your life for me. You have done enough already. Violet, no. Her storm gray eyes flashed with determination. If you go back, I go with you. We face this together, or not at all. Zachary wanted to argue, to tell her she was being foolish, that she would only slow him down and put herself in danger. But looking at her face, at the set of her jaw and the fire in her eyes, he realized she would not be swayed. Violet Brennan had been chained like an animal and had survived. She had climbed mountains with a wounded ankle and had never complained. She was stronger than she looked, stronger perhaps than even she knew. All right, he said finally. Together. But we do this my way, and you follow my lead. Agreed? Agreed. They reached Zachary's cabin by early afternoon. It was small and sturdy, built from logs he had cut and hewn himself, nestled in a high valley where a spring provided year-round water. The roof was sod, thick enough to insulate against winter cold, and the single window had real glass, a luxury he had packed up from Carson City 3 years ago. Inside, the cabin was sparse but functional. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, with a bed built into the opposite corner. Shelves held supplies and equipment, and furs hung from the rafters, curing in the cool mountain air. This is your home? Violet asked, looking around with interest. Such as it is. Zachary set his pack down and began checking his supplies. He had more ammunition here, another rifle, traps, and tools. I do not spend much time here in summer. Mostly I'm out on the trap lines or hunting. But in winter, this place is a fortress. Violet walked around the small space, touching things gently as though afraid they might break. It is nice. Cozy. I can see why you like it. It is quiet. Zachary was loading bullets into his rifle, checking each one carefully. Nobody bothers me here. I can go weeks without seeing another soul. Do not you get lonely? He paused, then looked at her. I did not think I did, but now I am not so sure. The air between them seemed to thicken with unspoken words. Violet met his gaze, and something passed between them, some understanding that went beyond language. They were both survivors, both people who had learned to be alone because alone was safer than the alternative. But being alone together was different. It was starting to feel like something neither of them wanted to give up. We should rest, Zachary said, breaking the moment. Tomorrow we start back to Carson City. It is a 3-day journey on foot, longer if we are careful. I want to be fresh when we get there. They spent the afternoon preparing. Zachary packed supplies, cleaned and oiled his rifles, and sharpened his knives. Violet watched and helped where she could, learning from him. He showed her how to load the rifle, how to sight down the barrel, how to control her breathing before squeezing the trigger. She was a quick learner, her hands steady despite her earlier ordeal. That evening, Zachary cooked a proper meal on the cabin's small stove. Venison stew with wild onions and potatoes he had stored in the root cellar, along with fresh bread he made in a Dutch oven. It was simple fare, but it filled the cabin with warmth and good smells, and for a few hours they could pretend they were just 2 people sharing a meal, not fugitives planning a dangerous return to civilization. Tell me about your life before all this, Zachary said as they ate. What was Missouri like? Violet's face softened with memory. Green. So green, especially in spring. We had a small farm outside of Independence, my parents and me. We grew corn and vegetables, raised a few pigs and chickens. It was hard work, but it was good. Honest. She paused, her expression growing sad. Then the cholera came. It swept through in a week, took half the town. My parents were gone in 3 days. I'm sorry. So am I. I sold the farm to pay their debts and bought a ticket west. Everyone said there were opportunities out here, that a woman with skills could make a good living. I can sew, I can read and write. I thought I would find work easily. She laughed bitterly. I was naive. You were hopeful. That is not the same thing. Zachary refilled her bowl with stew. And you will find work. Once this is over, once you are free, I will help you. There are good people in the territory. Honest people who would be happy to hire someone like you. What if it is never over? What if the Kellins win? They will not. Zachary's voice was hard with certainty. I promise you, Violet, they will not win. After dinner, they sat by the fire, neither one ready for sleep. Zachary found himself talking about things he had not spoken of in years. The war, his brother, the reasons he had fled to the mountains. Violet listened without judgment, occasionally asking questions, more often just being present. It was a strange feeling, opening up to someone, but it also felt right, like lancing a wound that had festered too long. In turn, Violet told him about her dreams. She wanted to open a dress shop someday, a real shop with a storefront and her name painted on the window. She wanted to design beautiful things to bring a little elegance and refinement to the rough frontier towns. It was a modest dream, but the way she described it, you could see how much it meant to her. You will do it, Zachary said. I believe in you. I believe in you too. Violet smiled at him, and in the firelight, she was radiant. Whatever happens in Carson City, we will face it together. The cabin had only one bed, and Zachary insisted Violet take it while he slept on the floor. She argued, but he was immovable. He spread blankets on the packed earth floor and lay down with his back to the fire, his rifle within easy reach. He listened as Violet settled into the bed, heard her breathing slow and deepen as she drifted off to sleep. He lay awake for a long time, staring at the darkened ceiling, thinking about the woman in his bed and the feelings she stirred in him. It had been so long since he had cared about anyone, so long since another person's welfare mattered more than his own survival. It was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. Somewhere in the small hours of the morning, he finally slept. He dreamed of Missouri farms and mountain valleys, of a woman with storm-gray eyes and a smile that could light up the darkness. They left the cabin at dawn 3 days later, after a brief respite that allowed Violet's ankle to heal enough for serious travel. Zachary led them on a route that avoided the main trails, circling wide to approach Carson City from the south rather than the north. It added time to their journey, but it also added safety. The Kellins would be watching the obvious approaches. They traveled mostly in silence, saving their breath for the difficult terrain. Zachary set a steady pace, not too fast but relentless, and Violet matched him step for step. Her injured ankle still pained her, he could tell, but she never complained. She was tough, tougher than most men he had known, and his respect for her grew with every passing mile. On the 4th day, they camped in sight of Carson City. The town sprawled below them in the desert valley, its buildings golden in the afternoon sun. Smoke rose from a dozen chimneys, and Zachary could just make out the sounds of civilization hammers on anvils, dogs barking, the distant whistle of a train. There it is, Violet said softly. I never thought I would come back. You do not have to, Zachary looked at her seriously. You can stay here, wait for me. I will go down alone, finish this, and come back for you. We agreed. Together. She touched his arm, her fingers light but firm. I am not afraid. Not anymore. They took my fear when they chained me to that post. They took everything except my will to survive and my anger. Now it is time to give some of that anger back. Zachary felt a surge of pride. This was not the same frightened woman he had found chained behind the Lucky Dollar saloon. This was someone who had discovered her own strength, her own courage. She was magnificent. Then we go in tonight after dark. There is someone I need to see first, someone who might be able to help us. The someone was William Turner, a lawyer who kept an office on the respectable end of Carson City's main street. Zachary had dealt with him before, selling furs and signing contracts, and he had always found the man to be honest and fair. If anyone would listen to Violet's story and take action, it would be Turner. They waited until well after midnight, when the saloons were closed and the streets were empty. Zachary led Violet through back alleys and dark lanes, avoiding the few late-night stragglers. Turner's office was above a dry goods store, accessed by an outside staircase. Zachary picked the lock with a skill born of necessity. Sometimes you needed to get into your own cabin when you had lost the key in the mountains, and they slipped inside. Turner lived in a small apartment attached to his office. Zachary knocked softly on the bedroom door, his hand ready on his knife in case of trouble. After a moment, a lamp flared to life and Turner's voice called out, cautious and suspicious. "Who is there? I'm armed." "William Turner, my name is Zachary Vance. I have traded with you before. I need your help." There was a long pause, then the sound of footsteps. The door opened a crack, revealing a middle-aged man with thinning hair and sharp, intelligent eyes. He held a small pistol, but when he recognized Zachary, he lowered it slightly. "Vance, the trapper? What in God's name are you doing breaking into my office in the middle of the night? It is a long story, and not one I want to tell in a hallway. Can we come in?" Turner hesitated, then nodded. He stepped back and opened the door wider, revealing a modest sitting room with a desk, bookshelves, and a few chairs. Zachary and Violet entered, and Turner closed and locked the door behind them. "Who is this?" Turner asked, gesturing to Violet. "My name is Violet Brennan," she said, her voice steady, "and I need to file charges against the Kellin family for false imprisonment, assault, and attempted coercion into prostitution." Turner's eyebrows shot up. He set the pistol down on his desk and studied Violet carefully. "That is a serious accusation. Do you have proof?" "I have the scars on my ankle where they shackled me. I have the testimony of Mr. Vance who freed me, and I have my own testimony about what they did and said." Violet lifted her skirt slightly, showing the bandages on her ankle. "They kept me chained behind their saloon for 3 days, Mr. Turner. They said I owed them money and that I had to work it off in their brothel. When I refused, they left me chained like a dog." Turner's face had gone pale. "The Kellins are powerful people, Miss Brennan. If you make these charges and cannot prove them, they will destroy you." "They already tried to destroy me." Violet's voice was fierce. "I have nothing left to lose, Mr. Turner, but they do. They have their reputation, their business, their freedom. If you help me, if you take this case, I think we can win." Turner was silent for a long moment, thinking. Then he looked at Zachary. "And you? What is your role in this?" "I freed her. I broke the lock and carried her out of town. The Kellins sent men after us, hunted us into the mountains. They shot at us, tried to kill us." Zachary's voice was flat, factual. "I will testify to all of that, under oath if necessary." "This is going to cause trouble," Turner said slowly. "Major trouble. The Kellins have the sheriff in their pocket, half the town council too. They will fight this with everything they have." "Then we fight back harder." Violet stepped forward, her eyes blazing. "Mr. Turner, I am not the first woman they have done this to. I know that now. I heard their men talking while I was chained up. They do this regularly, trap women in debt and force them to work in the brothel. If we can stop them, if we can bring them to justice, we will save other women from the same fate. Is not that worth fighting for?" Turner rubbed his face wearily. "You are asking me to risk my practice, maybe my life. The Kellins do not play nice when crossed." "I know." Zachary stepped forward, his massive frame seeming to fill the small office. "That is why I'm asking. Because it takes courage to stand up to people like them, and I think you have that courage. I have watched you in our dealings, Mr. Turner. You are an honest man in a place where honesty is rare. You charge fair prices, you keep your word. That is the kind of man I need on my side." Turner looked between them, these two battered, determined people who had walked out of the night with a story that could shake Carson City to its foundations. Then he sighed and nodded. "All right, I will take your case. But we do this properly, through the law. No vigilante justice, no more violence unless it is in self-defense. Agreed?" "Agreed," Violet said immediately. Zachary hesitated, then nodded. "Agreed. Good. Then we start first thing in the morning. I will file a complaint with the territorial marshal, not the local sheriff. He is too compromised. The marshal's office is in Virginia City, but they have authority here. We will need to get Violet somewhere safe while the investigation proceeds. The Kellins will come after her the moment they hear about this." "She can stay at my cabin," Zachary offered. "It is remote, defensible. They will not find her there." "No." Violet shook her head. "I will not hide. If I run now, it will look like I am lying. I need to face this head on." "Miss Brennan, that is very brave, but also very dangerous," Turner said carefully. I do not care. I am tired of being afraid, tired of running. The Kellins need to see that they cannot intimidate me anymore." She looked at Zachary, her eyes pleading for understanding. "You said we would face this together. That means I stand beside you no matter what." Zachary wanted to argue, wanted to lock her in his cabin where she would be safe, but he also understood her need to face her demons. He had run from his own for years, and it had only made them stronger. Sometimes the only way through fear was straight ahead. "All right," he said quietly, "but you stay close to me at all times, and if things go bad, you run. Promise me that." "I promise." Turner found them a room at a boarding house on the edge of town, one run by a widow named Mrs. Hartley, who asked no questions and charged reasonable rates. It was not much, just a small room with a single bed and a washstand, but it had a lock on the door, and Mrs. Hartley assured them she kept a shotgun under her counter for troublemakers. Zachary and Violet spent the rest of the night in that room, sitting on the bed with their backs against the wall, talking in quiet voices about what would come next. When dawn broke through the single window, neither of them had slept, but they were ready. Turner filed the complaint with the territorial marshal's office via telegraph that morning. The response came back within hours. A marshal would arrive in Carson City within 3 days to investigate the charges. In the meantime, Violet and Zachary were to make themselves available for questioning and avoid contact with the accused. Word spread through Carson City like wildfire. By noon, everyone knew that someone had filed charges against the Kellins. By evening, everyone knew it was the mountain man and the girl he had freed from behind the lucky dollar. The town divided itself almost immediately into camps, those who believed Violet and those who thought she was lying for attention or revenge. The Kellins themselves remained ominously quiet. Their saloon stayed open, business as usual, and neither Mrs. Kellin nor her sons made any public statements. But Zachary saw their men watching from across the street, saw the hard looks and whispered conversations. They were planning something. He did not let Violet out of his sight. When she needed to use the privy, he stood guard outside. When she wanted to walk to the general store for supplies, he went with her, his rifle conspicuous in his hands. People stared, some sympathetic, most just curious. Carson City had not seen this much excitement since the Silver Strike 3 years ago. On the second night, someone threw a rock through the window of their boarding house room. Attached to the rock was a note: "Drop the charges or die." Violet stared at the note with wide eyes, but her hands did not shake when she handed it to Zachary. "They are scared," she said. "Good." Zachary was not so sanguine. He boarded up the broken window and moved them to a different room, this one facing the back alley with 2 possible escape routes. Mrs. Hartley, bless her, did not complain, just helped them move their few belongings and offered to sit up with her shotgun if needed. The marshal arrived on the morning of the 3rd day. His name was John Pritchard, and he was a tall, lean man with a weathered face and hard eyes that had seen too much. He set up his investigation in Turner's office and began interviewing witnesses. Violet went first, telling her story from beginning to end while a clerk took notes. Then Zachary gave his account, corroborated every detail. Pritchard listened without expression, asking occasional questions, his face giving nothing away. When they were done, he leaned back in his chair and studied them both. "It is a compelling story," he said finally, "but it is your word against theirs. The Kellins will say you owed money, that you agreed to work it off, that the chains were for your own protection to keep you from running. They will paint you as a liar and a thief. Can you prove otherwise?" "I can." A voice spoke from the doorway, and everyone turned. A woman stood there, young and painfully thin, with haunted eyes. "My name is Sarah Mitchell. The Kellins did the same thing to me last year, kept me chained up for a week until I agreed to work in their brothel. I've been too scared to say anything until now, but if Miss Brennan is brave enough to face them, then so am I." Over the next 2 days, 4 more women came forward. Each had a similar story. Trapped in debt by the Kellins, threatened, coerced, chained when they refused to cooperate. The evidence mounted until even Marshal Pritchard, who had seen his share of frontier crimes, looked grim. On the 5th day, he issued warrants for the arrest of Mrs. Kellin and her 2 sons on charges of false imprisonment, assault, and coercion. The trial would be held in Virginia City, where the Kellins had less influence, with a judge imported from San Francisco to ensure fairness. The arrests did not go smoothly. Daniel Kellin tried to shoot the marshal when he came to serve the warrant, and it took 3 deputies to subdue him. Robert Kellin ran, making it halfway to the California border before a posse caught him. Mrs. Kellin went quietly, her face like stone, already calculating how to beat the charges. The trial lasted 2 weeks. Turner prosecuted with fierce determination, calling witness after witness to describe the Kellins' systematic abuse. Violet testified, her voice clear and strong as she recounted her ordeal. Zachary corroborated her story, his testimony carrying the weight of his reputation as an honest man who stayed clear of town politics. The defense tried to discredit the women, painting them as prostitutes and liars, but the sheer number of witnesses and the consistency of their stories made that impossible. The physical evidence, the chains, the post, the shackles with blood and skin still on them sealed the verdict. The Kellins were found guilty on all counts. Mrs. Kellin received 15 years in territorial prison. Her sons got 20 years each. Their properties were seized to pay restitution to their victims. The Lucky Dollar saloon was sold at auction, the proceeds divided among the women they had hurt. When the verdict was read, Violet burst into tears, not tears of sadness, but of relief, of vindication, of a weightlifting that she had carried so long she had forgotten what it felt like to stand straight. Zachary put his arm around her shoulders and held her while she cried, and for the first time since the war, he felt like maybe there was justice in the world after all. They returned to Carson City as heroes. The women who had been too afraid to speak out before now thanked Violet and Zachary publicly, some of them crying, all of them grateful. The town, shamed by what had happened under their noses, rallied around the victims. A fund was established to help them start fresh, and several local businesses offered employment. Turner refused to accept payment for his legal work, saying that seeing justice done was reward enough. Marshal Pritchard shook Zachary's hand and told him he had done a good thing, that the territory needed more men like him. Zachary did not know what to say to that, so he just nodded and mumbled something about doing what was right. Through it all, Violet stayed at his side. They had become inseparable over the weeks of testimony and trial, 2 people bound together by shared trauma and mutual respect. But it was more than that now, and they both knew it. It was in the way Zachary's hand would find the small of her back in a crowd, guiding her protectively. It was in the way Violet's face would light up when he entered a room. It was in the long conversations they had late at night in their boarding house room, talking about everything and nothing until the candles burned down to stubs. On the night after the verdict, Zachary took Violet to dinner at the finest restaurant in Carson City. It was not much by San Francisco standards, but it had white tablecloths and real china, and Violet wore a new dress she had bought with some of the restitution money, deep blue like the evening sky. Zachary had cleaned up as best he could, trimming his beard and putting on a proper shirt, though he still looked like exactly what he was, a mountain man uncomfortable in town clothes. They ate slowly, savoring the meal in each other's company. When they were done, Zachary reached across the table and took Violet's hand. "I need to tell you something," he said, his voice rougher than usual with nervousness. "These past weeks with you, they have been the best time I have had in years, maybe ever. I know I'm not much. I'm rough and I live in the mountains and I'm not good with words. But I care about you, Violet. More than I thought I could care about anyone." Violet's eyes filled with tears, but she was smiling. "Zach, you are everything. You saved my life, not just from the Kellins, but from giving up. You showed me that there are still good men in the world, that courage and kindness still exist. I care about you too, so much that it scares me." "I want you to come back to the mountains with me," Zachary said in a rush. "I know it is not much of a life, and it's lonely sometimes, but I could build you a proper house, with glass windows and a real floor, and a good stove. We could have a life there, together, if you wanted." "Are you asking me to marry you?" Violet's voice was barely a whisper. "I suppose I am, if you will have me." Violet laughed, a sound like bells ringing. "Yes. Yes, I will marry you, Zachary Vance. I will live in your mountains and help you trap and hunt and build our life together. I cannot think of anything I want more." They were married 3 days later, in a simple ceremony at the Carson City church, with William Turner as Zachary's best man and Sarah Mitchell as Violet's maid of honor. Half the town attended, packing the small church to overflowing. When the preacher pronounced them man and wife, and Zachary kissed Violet for the first time, the congregation erupted in applause. They spent their wedding night at the boarding house, Mrs. Hartley having decorated the room with wildflowers and given them a bottle of champagne as a gift. Zachary was nervous, his hands shaking slightly as he helped Violet out of her wedding dress, but she was patient and gentle with him, showing him that love could be tender as well as fierce. Afterwards, they lay in the narrow bed, Violet's head on Zachary's chest, his arms wrapped around her. Through the window, they could see the mountains rising dark against the starlit sky. "I never thought I would be happy again," Violet whispered. "After everything that happened, I thought the world had used me up and thrown me away. But you found me. You saved me." "We saved each other," Zachary corrected, kissing the top of her head. "You saved me just as much as I saved you. You reminded me that there is more to life than surviving alone in the mountains. You gave me a reason to come back to the world." They left Carson City a week later, after settling their affairs and saying their goodbyes. Zachary had sold his furs for a good price, and with that money plus Violet's restitution, they had enough to buy proper supplies and stock the cabin for winter. They loaded everything onto 2 new pack mules Zachary had bought them to replace the ones he had lost during the chase, and set out north into the Sierra Nevada. The journey took 4 days, but this time it was different. They were not running. They were going home. Violet rode beside Zachary on her own horse, a gentle mare named Daisy, and they talked and laughed as they traveled. Zachary showed her the landmarks he loved, the waterfall that turned to mist in the sunlight, the meadow where elk came to graze at dawn, the high pass where you could see 3 states on a clear day. When they finally reached the cabin, Violet dismounted and looked around with shining eyes. "It is beautiful," she breathed, "more beautiful than I remembered." "It is home," Zachary said simply. "Our home now." They spent the rest of the summer settling in. Zachary taught Violet how to fish and trap, how to recognize edible plants and track game. She proved to be a quick student, her intelligence and determination making up for her lack of experience. In turn, she taught him things he had forgotten in his years alone: how to laugh freely, how to enjoy simple pleasures, how to be patient with himself when things went wrong. She also made the cabin into a real home. She sewed curtains for the window, braided rugs for the floor, and planted an herb garden near the spring. She cooked meals that were more than just fuel, adding flavor and care to everything she made. And she filled the cabin with her presence, her laughter, her love, until Zachary could not remember what the place had been like before she arrived. As summer turned to autumn and the aspens began to glow gold against the dark pines, Violet discovered she was pregnant. She told Zachary one evening as they sat by the fire, his head in her lap while she ran her fingers through his hair. "I think we are going to have a baby," she said softly. Zachary sat up so fast he nearly knocked her over. "A baby? Are you sure?" "Pretty sure. I've not bled in 2 months, and I have been sick in the mornings." She smiled at his expression, which cycled rapidly through shock, fear, and joy. "Are you happy?" "Happy?" Zachary pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly she squeaked in protest. "Violet, I am terrified and thrilled and about a dozen other things I do not have words for. A baby, our baby." He pulled back to look at her, his eyes suspiciously bright. "You are going to be a mother. I am going to be a father. How is that even possible?" "The usual way," Violet teased, then laughed at his expression. "We will figure it out together, Zach, just like we have figured everything else out." They spent the winter preparing for the baby's arrival. Zachary built a cradle from pine wood, sanding it until it was smooth as silk, and Violet sewed tiny clothes and blankets. When the snow piled deep outside and they were snowed in for days at a time, they would sit by the fire and talk about names, about the future, about the life they would build for their child. "I want them to know they are loved," Violet said one night, her hand resting on her swelling belly. "I want them to grow up feeling safe and valued, never doubted or afraid like I was." "They will," Zachary promised, his large hand covering hers on her belly. "I swear it. We will give them everything we did not have: love, safety, a home where they always belong." Their son was born on a clear April morning when the snow was melting and the first wildflowers were pushing through the thawing ground. The birth was long and difficult, and there were moments when Zachary thought he might lose them both. But Violet was strong, stronger than he had ever imagined, and when she finally pushed their son into the world, his first cry was the most beautiful sound Zachary had ever heard. They named him Samuel, after Zachary's brother who had died at Shiloh. He had dark hair like his father and gray eyes like his mother, and from the first moment Zachary held him, tiny and wrinkled and perfect, he knew he would die before he let any harm come to this child. Violet recovered slowly, and Zachary took over every task in the cabin, caring for her and the baby with a tenderness that would have surprised anyone who knew him only as the hard mountain man. He changed diapers and walked the floor at night when Samuel cried, and he looked at his son with an expression of such wonder that it made Violet's heart ache with love. The years passed. Samuel grew into a sturdy, curious boy who loved the mountains as much as his father did. Zachary taught him to track and hunt, to respect nature and take only what was needed. Violet taught him to read and write, using books she ordered from San Francisco, determined that her son would have the education she had never finished. When Samuel was 3, Violet gave birth to a daughter. They named her Rose for the wild roses that bloomed around the cabin every summer. She was tiny and fierce, with her mother's determination and her father's strength, and Samuel appointed himself her protector from the moment she was born. The family thrived in their mountain home. They were isolated, but not lonely, self-sufficient, but not closed off. Once or twice a year, Zachary would take his furs to Carson City to trade, and the whole family would go with him. They would stay with William Turner, who had become a dear friend, and catch up on news from the wider world. But they were always happy to return to the mountains, to the quiet and the peace and the life they had built together. On Samuel's 10th birthday, Zachary took him on his first real hunting trip, just the two of them. They were gone for 3 days, and when they returned, Samuel was bursting with pride over the deer he had helped his father bring down. Violet praised him and cooked the venison for dinner, and that night, as they sat around the table as a family, Zachary looked at his wife and children and felt a contentment so deep it was almost painful. "What are you thinking?" Violet asked, catching his expression. "I am thinking about how lucky I am," Zachary said honestly. "How a few minutes of choice, one decision to stop when I heard you crying, changed everything. If I had walked past that alley, if I had minded my own business like most people do, none of this would exist. You would not be here. Samuel and Rose would not be here. I would still be alone in these mountains, surviving but not really living." Violet reached across the table and took his hand. "But you did not walk past. You stopped. You helped. And because of that, we have this, all of this." "I love you," Zachary said, the words coming easier now after years of practice. "I love you so much it terrifies me sometimes." "I love you too," Violet replied, "every day, more than the day before." The children made exaggerated gagging sounds at their parents' mushiness, and everyone laughed. Outside, the sun was setting over the mountains, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and purple. Inside, the cabin was warm and full of light and love. Years later, when Samuel was grown and had built his own cabin in a valley 10 miles from his parents', and Rose had married a kind young man from Carson City and moved to town to open her dress shop, Zachary and Violet found themselves alone again. But it was a different kind of alone than Zachary had known before Violet. This was companionable, comfortable, the easy silence of two people who knew each other so well that words were often unnecessary. They were older now, their hair streaked with gray, their bodies marked by the years of hard mountain living. But they were still strong, still capable, still deeply in love. Every morning, Zachary would wake with Violet in his arms and feel grateful for another day with her. Every night, Violet would fall asleep listening to her husband's heartbeat and know she was exactly where she belonged. One evening in late summer, they sat on the porch Zachary had built onto the cabin 20 years earlier, watching the sunset and sipping coffee. The mountains stretched out before them, eternal and unchanged, and Violet sighed contentedly. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked, "giving up your solitary life for all this chaos and noise and family?" Zachary looked at her, this woman who had transformed his life from mere survival into something rich and meaningful. Her hair was more gray than brown now, and there were lines around her eyes, but she was still the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. "Never," he said firmly. "Not for one single second. You gave me everything, Violet. Purpose, love, family, a reason to be more than just a man hiding in the mountains. You saved me just as much as I saved you. Maybe more." Violet leaned against his shoulder, and he wrapped his arm around her, holding her close. "We saved each other," she corrected gently, "and we built something beautiful together." "Yes," Zachary agreed. "Yes, we did." They sat in peaceful silence as the stars came out one by one, filling the vast Nevada sky with light. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled, and an owl answered with its haunting call. The mountains stood eternal guard around them, and the cabin behind them glowed with warmth and welcome. Zachary thought back to that August night so many years ago when he had heard crying in an alley and made the choice to stop. It had seemed like such a small thing at the time, one decision among thousands, but that choice had changed everything. It had given him Violet, and through her, it had given him a family, a home, a life worth living. He looked down at his wife, saw her eyes drifting closed as she relaxed against him, and felt his heart swell with love so profound it took his breath away. They had faced so much together: danger, hardship, the everyday challenges of building a life in the wilderness. But they had faced it all together, and that had made all the difference. "Come on," he said softly, standing and lifting Violet easily in his arms just as he had that first night. "Let us go inside. It is getting cold." Violet looped her arms around his neck and smiled up at him. "My hero," she teased gently, but there was real affection in her voice. "Your husband," Zachary corrected, carrying her across the threshold of their home. "Your partner, your friend, but always, always yours." He set her down gently inside and closed the door against the mountain night. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new joys, new moments to treasure, but tonight they had each other, and the life they had built together, and the absolute certainty that they had found something rare and precious, a love that had been tested by fire and had emerged stronger for it. In the end, that was all that mattered. Not the hardships they had endured or the enemies they had faced, but the love they had chosen and nurtured and protected. It was a love that had started with one man's decision to stop when he heard someone suffering, and it had grown into something that would outlast them both, living on in their children and their children's children. And as Zachary pulled Violet close and kissed her in the warm glow of their cabin, surrounded by a lifetime of memories and the promise of more years to come, he knew with absolute certainty that he would make the same choice again. 1,000 times over, in 1,000 different lives, he would always stop. He would always help. He would always choose her. Because that was what love was, not grand gestures or dramatic rescues, but the everyday choice to show up, to care, to stay. It was building a life together, one day at a time, one choice at a time, one moment of tenderness at a time. And Zachary and Violet had chosen each other over and over again, until their lives had become so intertwined that neither could imagine existing without the other. They had started as strangers, brought together by cruelty and chance, but they had become partners, lovers, friends, parents, and grandparents. They had become each other's home, each other's safe harbor in the storms of life. And that, more than anything else, was the greatest gift they had ever received, the gift of being truly known, truly loved, truly at peace. The cabin settled into nighttime quiet, the fire banked for the evening, the stars wheeling slowly overhead. Inside, two people who had once been lost had found their way to each other, and to a happiness neither had imagined possible. And outside, the mountains stood watch, eternal and unchanging, guardians of the love story that had unfolded in their shadow, a story of courage, redemption, and the transformative power of choosing kindness in a hard world. Their story was complete. Their journey from that desperate night in Carson City to this peaceful evening in their mountain home finally at an end. But the love they had built would endure, a testament to the truth that sometimes the greatest adventures begin with the simple decision to help someone in need. And sometimes the most profound love stories start with the breaking of a lock and a leap of faith into the unknown. Zachary and Violet had taken that leap together, and they had never looked back.